make our voices heard, that we want the violence towards children to stop wherever it is in the world.
Just about 2 years ago, a few days into the new Trump administration, at least 14 people were killed in a raid by U.S. Special Forces in a village in Yemen. It was a suspected Al-Qaeda compound, and half of the 14 who were killed were children. As candidate, Trump endorsed the killing of relatives as terror suspects. He said, "The other thing with the terrorists is you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families." Last August 9th, a Saudi Air Force jet that had been refueled in the air by a U.S. Air Force plane dropped a 500-pound laser-guided bomb on the school bus. 40 children on the way to a field trip and their teachers were killed in that attack. That bomb was made by Lockheed Martin. 85,000 children in Yemen may have died because of extreme hunger since the war began. For every child killed by bombs and bullets, dozens are starving to death, and it's entirely preventable. Kabul used to be a relatively safe place, but now there are regular suicide attacks and bombings. From January to September last year, as many as 653 children were killed and 1,483 injured in the conflict. Those killed in the famine and disease spawned by war, much larger than those who are killed by bullets and bombs. It's one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a baby, a child, a mother. Each year, more than 80,000 children die before their 5th birthdays in Afghanistan, and more than 12% of those are due simply to diarrhea. These wars poison the soul of our nation. Police violence in our streets is the racist logic of the war on terror coming home.
If you're a 10-year-old child in Gaza, you have survived 3 wars. You have only known occupation, you have only known siege. There is no economy in Gaza because of the Israeli-imposed siege. This last time I was there, we were bombed 110 times. One thing about the people in Gaza is that there is no PTSD, no post-traumatic stress disorder. It's ongoing, so there is no post to it. Children in Gaza are malnourished. You cannot imagine the kinds of the horrific circumstances they live under. There's no clean water in Gaza. 98% of the water is not fit for human consumption. There are alarmingly high rates of lymphoma, breast cancer, and brain cancers in Gaza because of this long-term exposure to depleted uranium. You have no clue of how these people suffer, and yet they see Americans and they welcomed me into their homes and they fed me when they didn't have enough to eat, and they want to just be a part of this world.
The proud mother of 3 sons and a widow. My oldest son probably has been profiled or stopped more than 10 times since we moved back from Omaha. I have 2 younger sons. Because of those stops, I'm concerned about their safety. My middle son, Jarrett, and his friends were stopped by the Des Moines Police Department. Doing nothing living happens more often than it goes reported. We know that there is an issue of racial profiling in our community. Knowing that I have a 15-year-old that someday wants to drive, I am terrified. It's sad that I have to, as a mother, talk to my children about how to get out of a police stop with their life. Can I see a show of hands of how many people have to talk to their children about a police stop from a point of fear? That's not positive. Keep them visible, comply. Our goal is to get you home safely. That is cringeworthy to me as a person, just to say that. The negative impact of racial profiling is vast. There are things like mental trauma to the victim and the family members, potential criminal charges, loss of voting rights, economic and impacts of court fines, the loss of current employment or future opportunities. We want people to be judged not by the color of their skin and to be automatically presumed guilty.
So the children and their families who are arriving at the United States southern border are being harmed in many different ways, in many different places. Young people are targeted for recruitment. They're either being forcibly recruited, or of course their people are trying to go and convince them to become members of gangs. Young women especially are either recruited to serve the gang members, to be in the gangs themselves, or they are often raped, because part of the entry, the bringing people into the gangs is that they either have to kill someone or they have to rape someone, and that is often what happens to young people in Central America. And so I think it's not very surprising that Central Americans, again, are fleeing to the United States. It's a place where they've seen their families in past generations come and do well. The violence in Central America now is worse than it was during the civil wars in the 80s. Then Central America is a very difficult place to raise children. It's a place where you see your children being killed. It's a place where children are not allowed to walk to school. Parents don't let their children walk to school alone because there is always that chance that they will be kidnapped or recruited into gangs on their way to school. People who are crossing the border is actually at a very low point for the past several decades. There are less people who are illegally crossing the border in the southern border for a long time. When you have hundreds and hundreds of children in shelters that were designed for 50, it's impossible to keep them in sanitary conditions. And low-paid workers who are there supposedly taking care of them, without a doubt there's mistreatment that goes on. Of course, we've seen extreme psychological damage. If they're already traumatized from the places that they're coming to, how much more are they going to be traumatized being forcibly separated from their parents for so long? There have been several children who have died in ICE custody. You have to understand, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land.
But as long as the people of Gaza have hope, I have hope. I have no reason to not have hope.
1 year before his assassination, Dr. King called for a revolution of values, and our very existence now demands nothing less. Educate yourself on these issues. Talk with your legislators. Make sure they know how you feel, but probably more importantly, talk to your neighbors, your fellow students, co-workers, the people you see in school, in churches, and bars and coffee shops. Make sure that everyone that you know knows where you stand on this, because we need to build a whole culture that opposes these wars. Raise up a culture that says no to racism, war, and the money behind it.